Kroger Delivery has one mission: to deliver the freshest food right to your door. That's why our drivers are pros. Our trucks are refrigerated. And when it comes to low prices, we always deliver. With $20 off your first order of $75 or more, there's no better time to get in on the action. Mission accomplished. Restrictions apply. See site for details.
Are you ready to try the best tasting gummy you've ever had? Well, Organifi's latest breakthrough, Better Biome Gummies, are not only delicious, but they're your new way to support a healthy gut. Better Biome Gummies are packed with the power of Live Ox Gold Kiwi Extract, a superfruit that's clinically proven to enhance your gut health by feeding beneficial bacteria and promoting growth, especially the hard-to-reach F. prau. Unlike other prebiotics that may cause bloating and gas, Live Ox helps relieve these discomforts while ensuring vital nutrients are well absorbed. And that's not all. These gut-balancing prebiotic gummies combine the soothing qualities of apple cider vinegar with the rich nutritional profile of New Zealand Gold Kiwi. This means improved digestion, reduced bloating, and a restored gut lining, making every gummy a step toward balance. Transform your digestive health today. Head over to www.organifi.com/bestofyou and use code bestofyou for 20% off your entire order. That's www.organifi.com/bestofyou. Hey everyone, I'm Dr. Allison, and I'm so glad you're here to discover what brings out the best of you. This podcast is all about breaking free from painful patterns, mending the past, and discovering our true selves in God. I can't wait to get started as we learn together how to become the best version of who we are with God's help. Hey everyone, and welcome back to this week's episode of the Best of You podcast. I am so delighted that you're here today for this week's episode. We are going to be diving even deeper into the theme of healing childhood wounds. We're going to focus today on an especially powerful area, and that's the area of generational trauma. Please don't forget to leave me your questions or ideas for any future episodes on the Best of You question doc. You can find that link in today's episode show notes or on my website, drallisoncook.com/podcast. So in last week's episode, we explored themes of enmeshment and individuation, and we went through 5 toxic patterns of behavior that can thwart the process of secure attachment and make it challenge for us to develop healthy relationships in adulthood. Today, I wanted to explore how these wounds sometimes run deeper than our individual experiences. They're formed as part of a larger story passed down through generations. That's why I'm thrilled to have Gina Birkemeier with us. Gina is a licensed professional counselor with a master's degree in both psychology and theology, along with advanced training in trauma and therapeutic techniques. She is the author of Generations Deep: Unmasking Inherited Dysfunction and Trauma to Rewrite Our Stories Through Faith and Therapy. And she brings invaluable insights into what it means to be a cycle breaker, someone who identifies, confronts, and heals generational trauma within their family. Gina also facilitates Generations Deep story groups to support people in their healing journeys. Today's episode is a fascinating deep dive. We discuss a couple of really new topics to the podcast. One is the topic of epigenetics, which is this idea that external factors and life experiences can influence how our DNA is expressed. It's just a really incredible field of study. And we also discuss the related concept of legacy burdens. For those of you familiar with the internal family systems, the IFS model of therapy, these are those beliefs or fears or emotional patterns that are passed down through our family, sometimes through numerous generations, without us even realizing it or even having direct experience of the painful events. These are really important concepts to understand because they can affect us. They can feel like these invisible weights that we carry that keep us stuck in the past. But when you begin to identify and address these generational patterns, we can break cycles of pain and create a healthier legacy, not only for ourselves, but for future generations. Please enjoy my conversation with Gina Birkemeier. I'm so glad you're here today, Gina. I've known about your work for a little while, and I'm just so thrilled to have this conversation with you today about generational trauma and what you call inherited dysfunction. I think that's such an interesting way to look at it. So welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be with you today.
I know your work comes from a very personal place. And so I'd love for you to share with us, what do you mean by inherited dysfunction, by generational trauma? And if you're willing, I'd love to hear a little bit about that in the context of your own personal story.
Sure. I can't ever think of a time when, for some reason or another, those dots connected for me, that there was something happening generationally. And when I talk about that, I'm talking about the trauma and the dysfunction. And a lot of times we think trauma like these really big things. And that is true. But then also there are other things that are these wounds, these identity wounds, these core wounds that hit us in such a way that it really forms and informs what we believe about ourselves, other people, the world, and even God. And the story that I tell in the book, it's my personal journey and my professional journey kind of combined into the two. And I start back with my great-grandparents who immigrated over from Italy, and some of the relational trauma and dysfunction that had happened all the way back then with my great-grandmother and her first marriage, and how that ended and how she ended up with my great-grandfather. And then what that perpetuated in terms of a cycle of some abandonment issues with regard to the children that she had before she met my great-grandfather. And then moving into my grandparents and the story of my grandparents and how that molded some things into my grandmother, some identity issues that then led her to get involved with my grandfather at a very young age, 14, having my mom at 15. And then how the great-grandparents tried to interject and how terribly wrong that went. And then as my mom grew up and things that she began to believe about herself that were impacted by the generation before her. And then how my mother then perpetuated that cycle once again and got pregnant with me at a very young age. And then was not able to roll into that parenting, nurturing role. And then ended up giving me up for adoption actually twice. She gave me up for adoption, took me back, then gave me up again, all before the age of 2. And it stayed in the family. So that complicated a lot of things as I grew up. There were a lot of secrets around me. And the energy that that created around me, the tones of voice that that created, that felt directed at me. And then my adopted parents separating and a lot of dysfunction there. And throughout this woven, there was fatherlessness, neglect, emotional immaturity. There were some borderline tendencies that we can see woven through a couple of the generations, some deep heart wounds, particularly in the women in my family. And then that coming over into my life. And then, of course, me then not knowing who my biological father was, my adopted father being somewhat distant, and my adopted mother having a lot of issues with prescription drugs and alcohol. There had also been a history of that in the family as well. And then in my life, as I got older, I started to perpetuate some of the same exact cycles. I had an issue of sexual abuse in 2 occurrences, one with some kids my age, and then I had a couple instances when I was older as well in the family, one outside the family, one in the family. And how all of these things, this dysfunction of sense of self, sense of others, how we connect, how we nurture, how we protect, all of those things pass down from one generation to the next, culminating in my life and coming to a point where I can't take any credit. I have to give God all the credit for it. This sort of, it has to end here. And I have this line in the book that says, it's like telling the raging trauma of the past, you cannot come beyond this point. It's like building a dam against that, those rapids, saying you cannot rage beyond here. It ends here. And then going into that journey of what does that even look like to first uncover what they are. I think it was a lot of cutting the heads off of dandelions for a while, but not really pulling them up by the root because I didn't understand what the root was. And so that took a lot of therapy and a lot of Jesus to get me there.
You talk about, we hear this word, cycle breaker. What does it mean to you? I hear in what you're saying in your story that this ends here. I hear in that cycle breaking. And that word is really powerful. It also can put a lot of pressure on a person. What do you mean by I'm a cycle breaker? And what does that look like in your life?
Yes. So I would say it can look like pressure. If it's coming externally in particular, it can really feel like pressure, right? So what I teach in my Generations Deep groups is that it isn't about putting pressure on yourself. It's actually about releasing a pressure valve, because there's a lot of pressure when we're holding all of that. We're carrying all the things that have been passed down to us, and we're just kind of holding on to them and we're absorbing them. But we can release them and let them go. There is a freedom in that. And it's a very empowering position to be in, to say, I'm breaking the cycle. Now, remember, ideally, we want to break it for the generations that come after us. But as they grow, that's their responsibility. We can only take so much responsibility for the generations that come after us. And there's room to talk about what we need to own and how maybe we have perpetuated some cycles with them and how we want to do better, right? We may need to own some things, apologize for some things, leave room for them to tell us how things we've done have impacted them. But really, cycle breaking is about saying, I recognize what I missed. I recognize the harm that was done to me. I recognize the harm that maybe I did to myself. And I'm moving into a place now where I'm healing from those things. And I'm moving forward in a space of wisdom and discernment. And of course, Holy Spirit-led relationships and actions that cause me to do something different than what has been done before. And it feels like this big, heavy term, but often it's really in the little details. It's in the little things that you do differently. And I point this out in my groups a lot. I'll have participants in the group say, well, this is what I'm doing. And I'll say, well, let's slow that down. You realize that's a cycle breaking that's going on right there. That's a cycle breaking? Yes, that's a cycle breaking. And then just to watch literally their posture and countenance change. Like, oh, I can do this. I'm already doing it. I didn't even realize. Even the idea of, I tell people often, you picked up the book, you're working through it and looking what the next step is. That alone makes you a cycle breaker.
You're naming things.
You're
just
naming
that very
things,
step of
right.
naming what happened. Yeah, that's really good, Gina. I want to back up just a little bit back into your story. Let's say you get into your 20s. I'm not sure, you're becoming a young adult. Is there a moment when something occurred to you that whatever it was that you were doing, sometimes it's when you become a parent yourself, where you realize, oh my gosh, this is something I've got to deal with? Was there a moment or a couple of moments that really began to be a cycle breaking moment for you before you maybe even knew all of the language?
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Before I knew the language. Absolutely. Before I knew the language. And I appreciate this question. There were a couple of them. And I would say, so I had my daughter very, very young. Like I said, I started to perpetuate the same cycles that had happened before me. And it was sort of with her, but I was in so much pain and so much dysfunction. I was actually also in a couple abusive relationships at the time, and things were not going well in my life. And I could not be the mom that she needed. I could not be present for her. And then not too long after that, kind of started to get my feet underneath me, and then ended up pregnant with my son.
How old were you at this time?
So when I was pregnant with my son, I was 23. And then being able to say, okay, I can't do this anymore. And I was in an abusive relationship. And I remember this moment where I was on my knees on the bed after a night of drinking to try to numb everything in my world. And I shook my fist at God and said, either you kill me or you take over my life, because I cannot do this anymore. And thank God that he decided in his mercy to take over instead of the altar. I don't recommend that prayer. That's not a formula that I'm giving. It's just what happened in my life. And I will, in all transparency, admit the next morning I woke up and said, I didn't mean it. Let me take that back. I want to take that prayer back. It was too late. It was too late. I think he knew that I really did mean it, that in that moment of desperation, that was the most real, raw, true me. And that is who he began to minister to.
And there was a turning point there.
Our dogs love Sundays. I'm not kidding. One of our dogs was the slowest eater on earth for the first several years of her life. It was painful how long it would take her to eat. The minute we introduced her to Sundays, she just laps it up. She loves it. Sundays is healthy dog food that's easy to store and serve. Most foods are one or the other, but Sundays is both. It's fresh dog food made from a short list of human-grade ingredients that contains 90% meat, 10% superfoods, and 0% synthetic nutrients. But unlike other fresh dog food, it doesn't require refrigeration or preparation. It's air-dried, so you simply pour and serve. It's so easy. Get 40% off your first order of Sundays. Go to sundaysfordogs.com/bestofyou or use code bestofyou at checkout.
Have you thought about giving yourself a gift this holiday season? How about the gift of language, something that helps you grow, learn, and become an even better version of yourself? With Babbel, it's all possible. Maybe you have a loved one whose native language isn't English. Imagine the look on their face when you surprise them by speaking their language this holiday season. I know that I lived in Germany for a semester in college and I spoke German during that time, but I've almost completely lost it. And with my niece coming home from Germany to spend time with us this Christmas, I can't wait to brush up so that we can have an actual conversation in German. What a fun gift for the holidays. With quick 10-minute lessons handcrafted by over 200 language experts, Babbel gets you speaking a new language in just 3 weeks. Babbel's focus is real-life conversation, not academic jargon or expensive tutors. Studies from Yale and Michigan State prove it works. Here's a special holiday deal for our listeners. Right now, get up to 60% off your Babbel subscription, but only for our listeners at babbel.com/bestofyou. Get up to 60% off at babbel.com/bestofyou. That's BABBEL.com/bestofyou. Rules and restrictions may apply.
The holiday season officially starts when you get that first card in the mail. Shutterfly makes it easy to add more meaning to the everyday with hundreds of holiday card designs that can be personalized in seconds with your favorite photos from this year. Select your greeting, customize the color, and even add little extras like personalized foil to make a holiday card that really shines. Enjoy 40% off with code SMILE40 at Shutterfly.com and send something meaningful this year. See site for more details.
When you started to reach out for help, because maybe you became aware, okay, something's got to change. Did you go to a therapist? Did you go to a church community? And what kind of help did you receive at that time that was both helpful and maybe not so helpful?
Yes, I appreciate the both and of that. So I first went to a church. It was just in me to say, that's where I need to be. And I went and found this church. And I will say there were a lot of really sweet, kind things about the church. But the church was very much okay, you had all those things in your past. You need to hurry up and clean them up and come be a part of this. The struggle is over. You're here now. And it was sort of a name it and claim it, kind of like no room for the process of, I just came from this super chaotic, dysfunctional life. And I'm still carrying all these wounds. And so it was sort of like, I use this kind of phraseology often, but it was sort of like, okay, triage discharge. Now you're here. Let's just do the thing. You're good to go. I was not good to go.
It's like the zap of the wand theology, sort of.
Zap of the wand. I love that. Yeah, zap of the wand. And so a lot of spiritual bypassing, a lot of hyper spiritualization, well-intentioned, don't get me wrong. I mean, well-intentioned. And it was another place where I felt like I don't fit in. I can't do this right. Quite frankly, it was just, I suck at this. What is wrong with me? Why can't I just...
Right. It becomes shaming that you can't get it together enough because you should be good now. Yeah. You turned on yourself.
Which is, I think, the tendency, particularly for women, is they turn it on themselves. And I definitely turned it on myself. And so just slowly backed out of that church and kind of started, I wouldn't say I dove back into my old ways, but a little bit, definitely, because it was too much. It was too much pain. And I just was looking for a way to numb. And I thought, no, you can't go back to where you were. Therapy. What about counseling? What does that look like? And something within me just kind of knew even then, I didn't know really what it was. I didn't know how you did it. I didn't know what it looked like. And so I just started looking in the phone book. Those, by the way, phone book used to be a book and there were phone numbers.
I remember them well.
Yes. And so then just kind of started this therapy journey where it was very focused on, and I learned a lot and it was really good. And I started changing my lens, started to rewrite my story, found the stones, as we say in narrative therapy. or the parts of me that I was trying to lock away, those vulnerable parts from IFS, like those exiles that I was like, nope, you go away. You're too vulnerable. You're going to get us hurt. Stay over there. Stay away. And so really started that journey. And also I was like, okay, but this isn't enough either. This all in church thing, ignore everything that happened. That didn't do it. And then this all in therapy thing, buy all the self-help books, do all of the things. That's not really doing it. I still feel like something's not right. Like something's missing. And it was really the intersection of the two. And then that was finding another church, actually became a mentor and is now a lifelong friend, who was faith-oriented. I say faith-informed and trauma-informed.
Therapist.
Yes. And so to be able to bring the two journeys together, and that was really where I was like, okay, this is how you do it.
The integration piece of bringing God's power and God's presence into the therapeutic process. Wow. So really a journey there. Just one more question about your story, because what I'm hearing is there were lots of phases, lots of trial and error, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, maybe another step forward, 3 more steps back. That is the nature, and I want the listener to hear that, especially when there's just a lot going on there. That's really normal, and that's what is sometimes so devastating is when you take those steps forward and then you find yourself taking the step back. It could be tempting to just give up altogether. So what I hear, and there's a real persistence to just keep, okay, I got to get back up and try. As you kept doing that, and as you got to that therapist that really was able to help you integrate, what was a breakthrough moment where maybe you really saw some truths, or there was a naming that, again, it doesn't come in a moment. We'll say it was a miracle. And yes, it was a miracle. And also it sort of came as a result of all of that persistence through the 2 steps forward, 1 step back, right? Did you have a moment like that when you got to that integrated piece?
Yeah. So I will say, I think it was a lot of little moments that came together. And I also want to say something else about that whole idea of it's the forward and the back and the forward and the back. And so I think it took me a little while to realize that what felt like backwards wasn't really backwards. What it actually was, is it was like, okay, this new thing I learned, and now I have all these things that are really painful and it feels like I'm back there again, but it's because I have a new level of awareness. I have a new level of accountability, a new level of recognition, a new level of ability to grieve. However it fits for your story, it isn't always about backward. Sometimes it's just like because you've stepped 1 step into it, now something else has been revealed to you. And that can sometimes feel like backward, but that doesn't mean it is.
That's really good. That's really powerful. That's a huge breakthrough right there.
Yeah. And that was a huge piece for me. And just even realizing some of those things in the moment and being like, okay, but no, you're not doing what you used to do. You're not having that old response, or at least not at the level. And so you're not actually where you were, and you know new things now, and you have new tools. And I would say one of the things that kept empowering the journey forward was how I did begin to see how we're talking about this in therapy, and scripture says this, and those go together really well. Oh, and also my emotions are actually not the enemy. We're created in the image of an emotional God. We see it in scripture, the whole gambit of emotion, and that's part of our image bearing. And then recognizing both, I would say what I say in my language now, and in what we do, Allison, is to be able to say, now I recognize the top down and the bottom up of it all, and how we can even see that in scripture. And so I think it was just the integration. It was the fuel, and really grace. And I don't want to leave that out of the conversation. And yes, God's grace. Yes, embracing God's grace, believing in his grace for me, but also learning how to have some grace for myself. And in that, one of the most effective ways that came was in learning how to have grace for the generations before me. And I don't mean letting them off the hook or minimizing what happened or how it impacted me, but just about having that grace.
In that journey, I'm sure boundaries became a part of it, and forgiveness, which is always really challenging word when we are recognizing and naming really hard things that happen to us, especially with our families. That both and naming really honestly, because we have to see the truth in order to be set free, and also figuring out the boundaries of that. So I imagine that was also a huge part of this journey.
As far as boundaries are concerned, I talk about this one a lot because this can be really, really hard. And I want to say a couple really important things about boundaries from my perspective. What I walk through with clients and what we talk about in Generations Deep groups is that boundaries are important, but the way you make the boundaries might even be more important. And so we don't make them out of anger. We don't make them out of fear. Because when we're no longer afraid and we're no longer angry, we have a tendency to maybe not hold the boundary. And then we teach people that we don't mean what we say. And then we open ourselves up to these boundary violations all the time. And so I think that's something to be careful of. The other thing is that you get pressure from family. Well, blood is thicker than water. Blood is thicker than water. You are supposed to keep this tie no matter what. And I'm laughing a little bit because every time in group, I will say, that was told to me too, that blood is thicker than water, blood is thicker than water. And then typically I will say, do you know what that whole phrase is? Do you know where blood is thicker than water comes from? Do you know what the whole phrase is? Do you know it, Allison? You're smiling.
No.
Do you know? Okay.
Mm-mm.
It's the blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb.
Whoa.
So it's actually the reverse. It actually means something completely different. So as people are telling you, oh, blood is thicker than water, blood is thicker than water, it's actually blood of covenant is thicker than water of womb, which is saying in those covenantal relationships, whether they're genetic or not, that is the strong bond. That is where the strength is. It isn't about the DNA imprints.
The new family you've created.
That God has given us. Absolutely.
Yeah. That's powerful. That's really powerful. So tell us a little bit. You've clearly at some point decided to become a therapist and to go into the work of helping others heal. How did you make that decision? And now you're doing all this amazing work to help others. So how did you make that decision? And what was that like for you to become a guide for others through their healing journeys?
So it started in pastoral care. I started there and then pretty quickly realized I wanted to do more. I wanted to walk further, longer with people than what pastoral care afforded me the opportunity to do. I did a lot of crisis things with women in domestic violence situations, women coming out of prison, single moms, homeless moms. I did a lot of that work initially, a lot of outreach, and then had, again, this mentor who had been a part of my life that I met through church said, I think you need to just move forward and just go formally get educated and go do this. And so I was like, okay, sure. It was kind of like, that's not really going to happen. I'll just do it because this person I respect is asking me to do it. I thought, I'll figure it out. But the more I learned about it, I was like, no, I actually could do more. And God opened the door for me to do that pretty quickly. And then really, I started to have the idea for the book while I was in my master's program. Because like I had said, for some reason, my brain always connected those dots of transgenerational dysfunction and trauma. And so I knew I wanted to write a book about it. So in getting my education as a therapist and also getting educated on epigenetic influences and what that has to do with trauma, and then bringing those things together. I was doing the generational trauma work long before the book came out, but then the book came out and God has been so kind and ridiculously generous with how he has allowed me to help other people and walk with other people. He has allowed not just nationally, but internationally for the book to be used in Guatemala and Nicaragua and Zimbabwe and across the US. And it has just been amazing. And pretty quickly from there, I had people asking because there's questions in the book, but I would get a lot of feedback. Are you going to do just like a separate workbook where we can put the answers to the questions? And so that's when the workbook was born along with the Audible version of the book. And then I guess it was maybe not even a whole year after that we had Generations Deep groups that were launched. And we do those. And I train other therapists how to run the Generations Deep groups as well. And so it's just been really incredible.
That's amazing.
This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. With Thanksgiving around the corner, what a great time to take a moment and thank the people who've invested in your life. In my case, it's a couple of mentors and a therapist who have made such a difference for me this past year. Along with this special person, there's another person we often forget to thank. That's ourselves. Life can be overwhelming, and it's easy to forget that we're doing our best to navigate it all. Therapy can be a powerful way to remind ourselves of our worth, build positive coping skills, and set boundaries that empower us to be our best. If you've been thinking about starting therapy, BetterHelp is a fantastic option. It's entirely online, designed to fit your schedule, and super flexible. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for no additional cost. Let the gratitude flow with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/bestofyou today to get 10% off your first month. That's betterhelp.com/bestofyou. I am so excited to share with you guys an incredible scientific breakthrough to support our long-term health and wellness. C15 is the first essential fatty acid to be discovered in 90 years. And what's amazing is that studies have shown it's 3 times better, broader, and safer than omega-3. Now, Fatty 15 is made with pure C15, and it's revolutionizing how we support our long-term health by repairing and strengthening our cells from the inside out. If you've been feeling sluggish, sleeping poorly, or just noticing that you're aging faster than you'd like, you may actually be low in C15. Fatty 15 is designed to replenish that essential nutrient and improve your metabolic, liver, and heart health while giving you deeper sleep and even healthier hair and skin. Plus, Fatty 15 is vegan, 100% pure, and free of fillers or preservatives, unlike many fish oils that go bad before they even leave the bottle. With Fatty 15, you get a clean, powerful way to restore your long-term health. Fatty 15 is on a mission to replenish your C15 levels and restore your long-term health. You can get an additional 15% off their 90-day subscription starter kit by going to fatty15.com/bestofyou and using code bestofyou at checkout.
Max Bankman, I'm the new doctor.
Welcome aboard the Odyssey.
ABC Thursdays.
This ship is heaven. We're tending to our passengers' dreams.
I'm in.
From 911 executive producer Ryan Murphy comes a splashy new drama on a luxury cruise ship with Joshua Jackson and Don Johnson.
It's your job to keep everyone alive.
She's in VFib. 1, 2, 3. Clear.
I have a pulse.
You're going to be okay.
Dr. Odyssey. Thursdays, 9/8 Central on ABC and stream on Hulu.
Can you, for the listener, what do we mean by this term epigenetics? It's really fascinating. Can you expand on that just a little bit?
So, for a long time, we believed that our DNA was just it. You get what you get and that's it. Fill in the blank, whatever you have. If you get diabetes, if you have whatever, alcoholism, it could be whatever. Those were just things that were passed to you genetically, and you would have to deal with that genetic soup that we're all given. And what we now know is that it's far less about the genetics and it's more about the epigenetics, which means, so epi, think like above or above the DNA, right? The thing that influences the DNA. And we all have these epigenetic influencers in our lives, and they can be anything from our nutrition, our environment, what we're consuming, holistically what we're consuming, not just about food, how we are raised, what has formed and informed us. And there are some interesting twin studies out there where you see 2 twins and they're separated and one's raised one way and one's raised another, and they come back together. And while they have the same DNA, they have completely different lives. And we've seen this in some research they did in Emory, where that cortical response to fear, to a negative stimuli can be passed down from the mice in this generation to the next without even introducing them to that negative stimuli. They're born afraid of these certain things because of that. But the really cool and fascinating thing is that we also know from epigenetics that it doesn't have to be that way. God in his infinite wisdom did not give us a trauma box. There's not like this place in our brain where the trauma has to just always live there and we carry it around like this boulder on our back. We're actually wired for the healing. We're not wired for the harm that comes. And so recognizing that epigenetically, we have this power to influence our lives, the lives of our children, the lives of our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren, to afford something different for the generations to come.
That's so good. There's always been biblically this idea of, we talk about the sins of the generations being passed down. There's a way in which now science is almost upholding that. Sometimes sin doesn't feel like the right word for it, but the trauma of the generations is passed down. And it's not just symbolically. Like you said, I love that example of like that fear response can be part of your DNA. And that doesn't mean you're locked into it. That doesn't mean it can't change. We can also have these restorative experiences.
So that's really how I open the book. The sins of the father are visited to the 3rd and 4th generation. A couple things about that. I used to hate that verse so much, so much, because I thought back when I was in my own wounding, how does a loving God, crack a whip that leaves a mark 3 and 4 generations out? Why is that a thing? And then as I started healing and learning about all of this, what I realized is, no, that's not what's being said. What's being said is if you don't own it and do something with it, it has the potential to affect 3 and 4 generations. And I thought, wow, that's so interesting, especially as I learned about epigenetics, because what we know is that if there is no intervention, like I talked about with that born trauma response, if there is no intervention, it will take 3 to 4 generations for that to naturally be evolved out of the generations. It takes 3 to 4 generations for that to just naturally subside. But with intervention, it can change rapidly, which brings me to the other scripture that talks about the fathers have eaten sour grapes and the children's teeth are set on edge. And that appears, I think, twice in scripture. And people will quote that as proof of, oh, well, it's just passed down. But actually, the prophets around them were saying, stop saying that. That's not true. And so even to know that there was that interjection of hope even then, it's not true. It doesn't have to be true. We can do something else.
I love that. I think you're saying something really important. Number one, the scriptural sayings, it's not God's punishment or declaration or, this is how I'm going to punish you. It's almost a warning of fact. This is what's going to happen if we don't deal with this. It will be passed down. You're not only hurting yourself, you are hurting the next generations. It kind of widens the lens. It can be really helpful, and it can be a really helpful motivation. Back to that phrase, cycle breaker, to your point, it's like, this isn't just about me. My life has ripple effects. It matters. And that's not pressure in that sense of you better get it right. It's a truth that can propel us to yearn to do the work, because the work is hard. It's not easy. It's not a zap of the wand. In IFS, there's a term called legacy burdens. Are you familiar with that?
Very much, yes.
For the listener, a legacy burden in IFS terminology is basically we have these burdens that we pick up from our past. They're parts of us that have been wounded, and they carry this deep pain that isn't just in the present moment. So you might become aware that you have a burden if you just completely lash out at a friend or at your sister or at your kids, and it's way disproportionate to the offense that occurred. And you might be tapping into a wounded part of you that's lashing out from decades of pain versus the pain of the present moment, right? So these burdens, part of the work of IFS is going and finding these exiles that carry these burdens and unburdening them. But one of the things in IFS that Dick Schwartz and others began to notice is sometimes their legacy burdens, the burdens don't originate in your own story. They originate in your family history. You might have a legacy burden as it relates to alcoholism, even if you were not an alcoholic yourself. You might have a legacy burden as it relates to your ancestors who were slaves, even if you were not a slave yourself, right? You might carry some of that pain inside of you, even if that specific thing didn't happen to you. Tell me a little bit about how you view legacy burdens and how that weaves into this conversation about epigenetics and generational trauma.
So I would say a legacy burden is a really great example of epigenetics. That's something that's been passed down, not even so much in the DNA, but what influenced the DNA. I say in the book that shame can be a legacy. And some of the other things, we don't think about that, but it's true. The shame can be a legacy. One of the things that I talk about is there's a part in the book where I say, so some of this you might be wondering, is this connected to something in my past? Or I have this struggle that I can't really name. I just know that this is how I feel when these things happen. And I don't really know where it came from. And I don't think I had an experience like that. That's probably time to think about you're carrying something that most likely is from the generations before you. But what's beautiful is when we do the work, it's a past, present, future work. We do the work here and now, but the work is effective of past, present, and future, because what we've carried is what's being addressed, the past. We're doing it in the present of our life, and then we're passing that on to the future.
That's so good. What's one piece of wisdom, Gina, you would give to someone listening who's maybe in those early stages of healing, of recognizing some of this, maybe feeling discouraged because they're having that experience of, well, I kind of get a little help and then I just fall right back into old ways. What's one piece of wisdom you would offer to that listener?
Well, I would say that I understand that feeling, and just because it feels like you're falling back doesn't necessarily mean that you are. And so take inventory of what you know to be true that you have learned that is different than what you had then and what you're doing now. We know from all of the science, from all of the research, that your brain is wired for that new capacity. You can do this, but to have grace for yourself in the process, and do not do it alone, because that isolation thing will feed the shame, and the shame will feed the cycle of the dysfunction. So you want to find that safe space of community. And in terms of the generational piece, when you're trying to figure out, well, am I passing down something I don't want to pass down? Or I think I am, and how do I change it? That's the time to say, even thinking about some of your work, Allison, in Boundaries for Your Soul, that's the time to think about, okay, what did I miss or what harmed me as a child? Have I been able to heal from that? And have I been able to give myself what I need to accept it from God, to accept it from the relationships around me? And if I haven't, then I need to go get some help in doing that, because there's no shame in that. And when I can say, yes, I've been able to name what I missed and name what harmed me and do this work of healing, you will just naturally then pass something different on to your kids because you're different inside.
It's happening. Yeah, I love that. I love that. That's so hopeful. Just that naming is so hopeful. I love that. Tell us a little bit more about your book, the workbook, and these groups and other things that you're doing to help people heal for those who want to learn more.
Yeah, thanks. So Generation Steep and the workbook, they're great for people to do. They can do them with their therapist, just one-on-one. They could just read the book. It's a great way to dip a toe in the water, take a pretty gentle approach in the book. And the idea is bringing them through my story first. I think that kind of feels like a fellow traveler thing. And that's the feedback that we've received, is that it really feels like walking with. And then the second half really does talk a little bit more about the therapy side of it. It talks about what is this being with Jesus and being with a therapist, and those two things integrated together. What does that even mean? And so I think that it's appropriate for a lot of people who might not be ready, but also for people who are on the journey and they're looking for a next step. The groups, you can reach out through my website, GinaBirkemeier.com, and find out about the groups. We have them online, we have them in person, and we also do training for therapists who want to either do the one-on-one work with my book and workbook, or if they want to actually do groups themselves. I train therapists on how to do that as well. And then there's an Audible version that has some extras, some interviews with some people that those interviews have been helpful to a lot of listeners, some extra things to think about in terms of this journey of healing. And then in my practice, we have started something called the Collaborative Care Initiative, which has been a long-term dream of mine, to bring multiple practitioners under one roof to truly provide that holistic model of care and to make it available to a broad socioeconomic base. So we have all of our therapists. There's 43 therapists. We have all of them. And then we're bringing on spiritual direction, nurse practitioners, psychiatric nurse practitioners, trauma-informed somatic release and body practices. We have a whole variety of people that we're bringing on, and really excited about the growth that that's already experiencing. We have neurofeedback, and it's just been really great to bring all of these people under one roof. And the really cool thing is these adjunct practitioners, I bring them in to do educational pieces for our therapists. So it's really for the therapists to learn how to be holistically minded as well. And our hope is that once it's been a little bit ready, fire, aim rather than ready, aim, fire, but it's been great. And our hope is that we'll be able to build a model that might be replicable for other practices around the country.
Is it mostly online?
No, it's mostly in person, but there is online available.
And where are you located?
We're in Missouri.
So folks in that area could access. That's incredible. What a vision. Wow. So where can people find you if they want to learn more about your work and about this collective?
Yeah, so they can find me at GinaBirkemeier.com, and I'm at the socials. They can find me at My Out Loud Voice on the socials.
Gina, what would you say to that younger you, 23, 24, 25? What would you want her to know from where you are now?
I think I would want her to know not to give up, that she was worth more than what she realized, and that not to do it alone, to stop trying to do it alone. And that God had so much more for her, for us, and that there would come a time when she could look back and say, the work was hard, but the work was good.
I love that. And what's bringing out the best of you right now?
Oh gosh, family things, new grandchildren, this collaborative care. I'm also working on my PhD right now, and the doctoral program is incredible. It brings out, I would say, the good, the bad, and the ugly. But in a great way. I'm having the privilege of working with clinicians in Ukraine right now, and that has really been an incredible, humbling experience. God is meeting me in ways that I had not anticipated through all of those things, and I'm just so grateful. And I think it is bringing out the best in me, and it is also calling me to refinement in other areas as well, which I hope He will continue to do while I'm here on this earth.
Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us, all that you're doing. I'm just so grateful to have this conversation with you today.
Thanks, Allison.
Thank you for joining me for this week's episode of The Best of You. It would mean so much if you take a moment to subscribe. You can go to Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, or wherever you listen to podcasts and click the plus or follow button. That will ensure you don't miss an episode and it helps get the word out to others. While you're there, I'd love it if you leave your 5-star review. I look forward to seeing you back here next Thursday. And remember, as you become the best of who you are, you honor God, you heal others, and you stay true to your God-given self.
Hey, I'm Greer, host of the Unfinished Idea podcast, where listeners and I get to journey together to better understand the neurodiverse world. Together with my husband, we have 2 boys and 2 dogs and raising a child with additional needs. Our day-to-day experience isn't being talked about in everyday life, and I see a gap in those leading people who are neurodivergent. Whether you're a parent, a friend, a teacher, or a neighbor, the neurodivergent world is all around us. So this podcast is for you. I have conversations over a cup of tea or coffee, helping to bring awareness about how neurodivergent people experience the world, as well as families who are raising children with different needs. This podcast will share practical help, tips, and the joys, struggles, and differences in being neurodivergent or raising a child who is. Each week, I will spend 30 minutes talking and interviewing others in the neurodiverse space and giving you the opportunity to learn and grow and feel seen and heard by how we interact with each other and the world. Search for The Unfinished Idea in your favorite podcast app and come learn about the neurodivergent world. I'm looking forward to seeing you there.